So at least 228 current or former police officers died by suicide in 2019, surpassing the number of on-duty deaths, with New York State leading with 27 self-inflicted deaths recorded among its law enforcement, according to a newly released report. Huge problem. Let's get law enforcement specialist Dr. Alex Del Carmen. He heads up the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University in Fort Worth to talk about this. Doctor, great to have you on the show. We talk about vets coming back from combat and the suicide rate that is astounding and concerning and a definite problem. I think a lot of people probably, this report and this story kind of comes as a shock to some people. What say you? Is this something that people kind of need to know about and to get out there?
Yeah, good morning, and thanks for having me this morning. Absolutely, and I think your analogy of making this comparable to combat veterans coming back from the war zone is exactly right. Oftentimes we see law enforcement, facing the worst of society on a daily basis, and we seldom think about what the effects of that are on human beings that go out every morning to try to keep the rest of us safe, right? So at the end of the day, we see now that it's taken its toll, and to be honest, as surprising as it may be to have such a large number, to those of us that have been in the field for 21 years, as it is the case for me, it's not rare, because if you've been in law enforcement long enough, you know that you get to be exposed to the most horrible conditions in the world, and you don't bring those home with you.
I've talked to several people that I've had several friends that were cops and are cops. And I remember one conversation that we had that was pretty frank, and that they felt like they were coming home and basically living on an island, that, we would talk about things. And he said, there's stuff I can't talk to you about, for legal purposes, but there's things that you're not going to be able to cope with. And so they're kind of isolated as far as who can kind of help them out.
Exactly, right. So I often make the analogy that, or give the example of a gentleman coming home from work, and most of us, when we get home, we decompress and we have a sort of our debrief time with our spouses where we say, how our day went, and 99.9% of the things that we experience, we can convey to that person. Well, in law enforcement, they can't, right? So you have, oftentimes, and it is the case with some of my friends that are married, have young kids. They come home and their spouses tell them, well, you don't want to talk about that in front of the kids. You don't want to say that in front of the kids. So then that isolation begins to take place where the officer cannot share any of those things at home openly, and then he or she will begin to share them then with other people at work, which will only add to that stressor. So we see that this is a clinical issue. It's going to get worse. And I think a lot of factors are at play here, and we've got to raise awareness, which is the reason why I think it's important for us to be talking about that this morning.
So we talked about New York State, where, of course, New York City is, but for some reason I'm thinking this is not just a big city problem. Are we looking at some of the smaller metros and communities out there also at issue?
Yeah, absolutely. And New York City and New York State, rather, and the New York Police Department always highlight, the headlines because of who they are historically in our country and the volume of police officers that, say, NYPD has in place. But this is a crisis that does not discriminate, right? This is something that takes place all the way from a small agency to a large agency. And I would argue that in small agencies, they probably have it worse in the sense that many of them do not have clinicians on staff. Many of them do not have the budget to be able to provide that kind of help. I know in the 21 years that I've been affiliated with the profession, I've lost two really good friends to suicide in law enforcement, and both of them came from very small towns, very small cities. And so, unfortunately, there's no discriminatory practice on this, and this will happen to law enforcement throughout the country, most of which, by the way, are not in the New York Police Departments in terms of size and volume.
What can we as citizens do, in our own small part? Is there anything that we can do, or what we can do as a say on a macro level, department by department? Is there anything that you see that could be inputted that wouldn't be a lot of money, that wouldn't, kind of coincide with budgets, but would help out?
Well, for starters, I think we need to be aware of it, right? We need to have a national dialogue on, what these realities are. Oftentimes, we're quick to point fingers when police officers do something wrong or something is highlighted in the media, but the day in and day out police officer that serves a career of 30 years in an impeccable manner, we never talk about that person. So I think we need to raise awareness. We need to pressure those local politicians to fund at least a clinician to be on site, to have somebody that has a mandatory debrief, with police officers on an ongoing basis. I know medical doctors do that. My sister is an oncologist, and she meets with a psychiatrist once every week, according to the hospital policy, because of all the realities that they get to face. Well, police officers are no different. They should be mandated to see a clinician on an ongoing basis, and that clinician should be afforded to them at no cost to them, to be paid for by tax dollars that, surely enough, we at the very least owe them that.
Law enforcement specialist Dr. Alex Del Carmen. Now, as somebody who's definitely directly related, how concerned are you? I mean, I'm looking at these numbers of folks, whether it's their own bullet or being murdered, and if you were wanting to be a cop, say 10 years ago, coming up, going to school, doing all the proper training, you might have second thoughts, and your family might be urging you to go a different direction. How concerned are you of recruiting numbers as they are right now, going 5-10 years from now?
I can tell you that at the university level, we see many young men and women that enter our ranks of criminal justice when they get a bachelor's degree. 20 years ago, they would easily go to a local law enforcement agency and apply for a job. Nowadays, many of them on their second and third year, they're telling us that they don't want to be police officers. And if they do, they want to go the federal route, because the last thing that they would want to do is expose themselves to the hatred, to the media bashing, to the lack of understanding, to the high divorce rate, the high alcoholism rate that police officers oftentimes are associated with as a profession. So this is very concerning for us. We want good cops, and we almost want perfect cops now, that the video technology is out there and we're showing and highlighting how they behave on an ongoing basis. We better step up and be able to afford, some assistance so that we can continue to recruit good police officers.
All right, as we let you go, let's get some advice out there for somebody that might be either themselves in a situation where they've had suicidal thoughts, or somebody that they know about that they're a little bit concerned about. I know firsthand, because of a news story that came out, this is several years ago, but the person was worried about what people were going to think or what was going to come down on them if they made that phone call, like a report was going to come out and they were going to have that scarlet letter of S or D on their forehead, and they didn't make the call and they ended up killing themselves. What say you, as far as if you have one-on-one through the radio, what's your advice for somebody out there in that situation?
You got to talk to somebody. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem, right? However big of a problem or issue you're facing, it's not worth taking your life, because you got to think about all the other people that are going to be affected by your actions. It's a very selfish act, and we also know that it's an act that is expressed by mental illness. So you've got to get help, right? Don't worry about the ramifications. There are a lot of groups out there that are anonymous that you can call and talk to somebody and get help, right? So at the end of the day, we can't help you if we don't know what you're going through. So you've got to let us know so that we can come in and assist you. Like I said before, that there are still many, many thousands, perhaps, of suffering families that are still grieving the loss of a loved one because of suicide. And oftentimes we think that we're better off dead than alive because of the problem that we're facing, right. And that's not the case. There's never a problem big enough to terminate one's life.
Is there a hotline or number that you recommend that you think is a little bit better than all the rest, or are they all pretty much just...
I don't really typically rank, hotlines for suicides per se, because there are many of them that are really, really good. But I can tell you that at the end of the day, we do have some national hotline numbers, like the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. Once again, 1-800-273-8255. And I know that they're there 24 hours a day, ready to help anyone.
Doctor, thank you so much for the time. Continued success, and we'd love to have you back in the future.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Dr. Alex Del Carmen from the Tarleton State University Criminal Justice and Strategic Studies